Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Louisa Savage, Executive Editor for Growth at Politico, and we, as a transatlantic news organization, are so thrilled to be a part of this historic summit, and thank you so much for the U.S. Chamber and NATO for making this possible. We are here on this panel to be the candid panel, to really talk about some of the challenges and some of the opportunities facing NATO's industrial production. This is an alliance of 32 member states that include some of the biggest, most prosperous, most technologically advanced nations in history. And you would think they could produce some bullets. So we're going to dig into why it's not so simple. We know that NATO countries have accelerated production, but they've also emptied stockpiles. So to bring forward the government perspective on these important conversations today, we have a really distinguished panel, and it's truly my honor to be on stage with the Minister of Defense of the Republic of Estonia, Hanno Pevkur, the Deputy Chief of Cabinet to the Italian Minister of Defense, Major General Enrico Barduani. And the Major General is also about to become commander of the NATO Kosovo force as of October. We also have the General Director of Industrial Cooperation Division at the Ministry of Defense of the Czech Republic, Radka Kondrlova. And we weren't quite sure what was going to happen in the UK, but we're so glad that today we have Andy Start, CEO of Defense Equipment and Support, and National Armaments Director of the United Kingdom. So thank you so much for being here to share your perspective and your expertise. But since we do want to be the candid panel, I think we need to start with the Estonian. I'd like to start this conversation really by just setting what's at stake here. And Minister Pevkur, obviously Estonia, you're on the front lines, you have a front row perspective. For those here in the room today and those watching on the live stream, and perhaps for those here in the United States and in other countries who are wondering, do we really need to be prolonging this conflict, that maybe it's time just to find a settlement? Can you speak to what you see being at stake?
Well, first of all, thank you for being invited, and it's good to be here. And it's these kind of forums give the opportunity to address the acute needs what we have at the moment. So, what is on stake? On stake is that Russia is strengthening its muscle, and we see that they are investing at the moment close to 9% of the GDP to defense.
9%.
Well, 7 to 9, different estimations, but 7 to 9% is the estimate what Russia is doing at the moment. So when we compare that to NATO, which is, we also heard from the Secretary General that it's 2% for 23 countries. Estonia is among 4 at the moment who is in the 3% club. So we've just passed this year United States. Sorry for that. Well, of course, not the absolute.
Sorry, not sorry.
Not absolute figures, of course. We would like to have the absolute figures, but well, the point is that we are not doing enough for our own defense, and even when we are vocally advocating for 2.5%, then we all understand that when we go back 40 years, then the NATO countries invested 3.5, 3.7, 4%, even more. And after the collapse of the Soviet Union, we dropped to 1%. So, and this shortage, what we have now, gained in last 30 years, means that the stockpiles are empty. We cannot give enough firepower to Ukraine, and we cannot fill all these obligations what we've set together in NATO as a club. So, what is in stake? It's our freedoms. What is in stake? Because even when you take a Russian 9%. And when the war will be over in Ukraine, the Russian economy is on the full war footage. So which means that they have to continue like that, because otherwise millions of jobs will be lost in Russia. And when we are not, facing this threat, then we will face the threat to lose our freedoms. And NATO is a club of freedom-loving countries who say that we are one for all for one. And this is why, of course, it is extremely important to address this threat. And the only threat Russia understands is the power. So when we are not addressing that, then we are just risking losing our freedoms or risking the possibility to end up in a real war with Russia. And I believe no one who has been able to keep this peace in transatlantic zone for 75 years wants to go into war, into real war.
And just moving from Estonia to Czech Republic, Ms. Kondrolova, how does that look from your perspective? You're not right there on the front lines, but you have history.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. For me as well, it's a great honor to be here with you today on this panel on behalf of the Czech Republic. So we had, with Hanno, we had a bit of statistics, and I think the US National Security Advisor, he quoted President Truman, and I will maybe quote Winston Churchill, who said that an appeaser is one who feeds a crocodile, hoping it will eat him last. And I think with history, it was proved that this appeasement policy is not the good way forward. We've seen it again in 2014 when Russia annexed Crimea, when we were not able to act collectively. So it didn't work in the history, it won't work again. So I think, and as Hanno said, we are fighting for democracy. Earlier it was said we are fighting also for the world order, and it's all happening in Ukraine. What is also important to see is that China is the biggest enabler of this Russian aggression in Ukraine. And you have the axis Russia, China, and Iran, an axis that the NATO and also the US is very strong and voiceful. There is a need to fight with. So I think from the perspective of what is at stake, it's a real world order, democracy, sovereignty, what NATO stands for, what we as the member states stand for. And of course, Czech Republic, we also have our history with Russia, so that's why we were among the first ones to start supporting Ukraine with military deliveries. Our defense industry has been exemplary in supporting Ukraine with the military deliveries. Even Czech citizens starting giving money for the industry and for others to be able to buy the military material to be sent to Ukraine. So, and Secretary General said that as well at the beginning. Defense, deterrence, defense and security. There's no strong defense, deterrence and security without strong industry. So I think now we are standing at the moment where the industry needs to cooperate and stand for what the NATO is able to. So more than 30 countries, the rich countries in the richest countries in the world, they have to be able to fight the Russian aggressor.
Absolutely, thank you. And I think most people in this room would agree with those sentiments, but other people in this country are still very skeptical. And Major General, in your country, in Italy, there are plenty of people who are skeptical about this conflict, even though your government is very supportive. You're not on the front lines. You're not in Eastern Europe. What are the stakes here for Italy?
So first of all, thank you so much for this opportunity. And I cannot agree more that what is at stake is the global international order. I mean, it is not just a matter of the war in Ukraine. If you have an outlook on the geopolitical situation, we can see, we can witness the assertiveness, the Russian assertiveness also in the Arctic, both for economic and military interests. And the problem in the Arctic, the threat in the Arctic is a direct threat to the US security. If we move towards south, we can see how Russia is still present in the Western Balkans. And I'm not referring just to the traditional bonds with Belgrade. I'm referring to the situation, the dramatic situation in Bosnia-Herzegovina with the influence that Russia has on the Republika Srpska, and moving towards south to Kosovo, where the Russian presence is still there through, in an indirect way, through the Serbian Orthodox Church. If we enlarge our vision to the Middle East, we have a frozen conflict down there in Syria, and I have to recall that Russia has 2 major military bases in Syria. The situation in the Middle East is complicated by a fragile Iraq, and of course is deteriorated by the strong relationship between Moscow and Tehran. And if you look at the effects of the war in Gaza, we can see the tense and unstable situation in the southern part of Lebanon. And of course, on the other side, in the Red Sea, we can see the war that Houthis have moved towards Western countries. I use the word war due to the fact that the Houthis, since the very beginning of their kinetic activities, stated that they will not target Russian and Chinese vessels. This statement is a sort of declaration of war towards the Western countries. And if we move to the African continent, look at the increasing day-by-day Russian military presence in that continent. The Russians are replacing the vacuum created by our withdrawal. And in Africa is more than evident the strong link between Moscow and Beijing. There is also a huge Chinese economic penetration that is always followed by a military presence. And I can mention the biggest Chinese military base abroad in Djibouti. So you can see the European area is in some way encircled by Russia, but if we had the strong relation between Moscow, Tehran, and Beijing, and also having all the problems in the Indo-Pacific area, we can see that really the international order is at stake.
Thank you. I think all of us in this room were watching the British elections with great interest. There's a new prime minister who said his message to the world is that the UK is back and he wants Britain to take a larger role on the global stage. Mr. Starr, what should allies expect from this new government in terms of the Ukraine conflict, and how do you see the stakes here for the UK?
Well, maybe I'll speak to stakes first and then talk about the UK position. Of course, I agree with what my colleagues have said around the importance of supporting Ukraine because of the values and because of the wider dynamics of global security. I'd also argue that all of us need to support Ukraine for some very selfish reasons. If we think about the economic impact of a failure in Ukraine, we would be talking firstly about a return to a Cold War scenario. In the Cold War, we're spending 6% of GDP. Rather than the 2% average we're spending. That's trillions of dollars more than it would cost to support Ukraine in the war. But we'd also be talking about an emboldened series of countries who thought that imperialistic, expansionist strategies were things to be lauded and to be followed. And that's going to crash global trade. And if you see that impact on wider global trade, the impact on economies not only in Europe, but absolutely here in the US as well, will be catastrophic. So from a simple domestic economic perspective, it is in our national interests and our personal interests to make sure that we support Ukraine to the extent that they need. Ukraine, to match the scale of Russian production, Ukraine needs about 300 billion over 5 years. That's a lot of money to make the gap up from their own domestic ability to support it at about 200 billion up to match the Russian number. But it is a tiny fraction of that which it would cost if you think about the costs of coming up to 6% of GDP and the wider economic impacts. So for selfish reasons, the stakes are high, and we can't afford to allow Ukraine to fail. From that perspective, I'm therefore delighted that as we've had a change of government, but we haven't had a change of national resolve in terms of the UK position. John Healey, our new Secretary of State, who will be here very shortly in Washington, committed in his very first act in walking into the Ministry of Defence to continue to support Ukraine as one of its highest priorities, and in fact flew out to Odessa over the weekend, literally 48 hours of his election, reasserting the UK's commitment to support Ukraine, reasserting the UK's commitment to support NATO, and our continued commitment to get to 2.5% of GDP in order to make sure that we are fully funding what we need to fund.
Well, thank you. And that's a great segue into the theme of today, which is industrial production and NATO. I wanted to ask each of you, we're 2.5 years into this conflict. A lot of stockpiles have been emptied, but a lot of initiatives have been started up. There's the NATO Defense Production Action Plan that was aimed at fostering and aggregating demand and improving cooperation and coordination. I'd like to ask you each, how would you assess how NATO is doing on industrial production right now? And if you were to give a letter grade, has this been an A, a B, a C, something less? Are we failing? Are we passing?
Oh yes, this audience. This is exactly what the audience would like to hear. How we assess the production. No, I will start in a different way. So let's take the facts. The fact is that NATO's countries are spending at the moment around 1.2 trillion to defense. From which around 27-28% goes to capabilities, to new investments. So this is around 400 billion, a bit more, which goes directly to capabilities. So this goes mostly to the industry. But unfortunately, we still see that we have some problems. That when we take, let's say, a lot has been said about the ammunition production. So Russia is producing at the moment around 2 million rounds of 152, which is their type of high caliber artillery rounds. We are producing in Europe, so the capabilities went up or have gone up, and when we combine US production and European production, then it's close to the same by the end of the year. So it sounds good, but the problem is that we have to feed Ukrainians, we have to feed our own stockpiles. So and the problem is that many countries still do not have the contracts. So the industry is ramping. So it's chicken and egg question. You know, do you need to show first the money, and then the contract, or you and then the industry will ramp up, or you are waiting that the industry will ramp up and then you will show the money. So at the moment, I'm quite confident that still the industry is waiting for the contracts, because I've seen that ourselves, that in Estonian case, that we put into the market last November 280 millions for 155. And that time, Estonia was the biggest buyer of 155 ammunition in Europe. So when the small country like Estonia is the biggest buyer of 155, then sorry, we have a problem.
Well, you're raising a question that I think a lot of the business executives in this room have thought about a lot, and I'm sure they'd love to hear your thought on, which is how do we move to longer term, more predictable procurement that allows those kinds of longer term investments to pay off? Like you said, chicken egg, how do we break that cycle?
Well, you just have to go to the procurements. You just have to go to the contracts. And of course, I understand also that there are difficulties. So I will just give you one example. We decided in Estonia to establish an ammunition plant. And the reality is that we have democracies. And democracy, unfortunately, is a huge problem in that sense. Don't understand me wrong. So I'm the biggest supporter of liberal democracy. So, but the case is that when there was a problem in Russia producing artillery shells, artillery rounds, then basically when Putin said that this sausage factory will now produce shells, then they started to produce shells. We say that okay, we want to have more from Rheinmetall or from Nexter, and then we start the planning process, which takes 2 years to evaluate all the Natura 2000 assessment and to make the planning and to have the negotiations with the neighbors and everything. And miraculously, after 3 years, we can have the production. So, and also, I have this experience because we will buy a lot of new ATACMS. So we want to buy. But when I come to Lockheed Martin, hopefully you are somewhere in the room, so you will say me that you will get your ATACMS in 2028. So nice. I don't have time till 28. So today is 24, and 2028 is a very positive estimation. Probably it's 29 or 30. So it's the same with the air defense. So we bought air defense from Deal Defense. IRIS-T. At the moment, it's much needed in Ukraine, and probably our delivery will be delayed because of that. The German government also bought something for Ukraine. So it's not easy, and I fully understand all the industry because it's not so easy to find new workforce, to make new planning, to build a new factory. So this is exactly. You need to have this long-term commitment, long-term contracts with the industry. So it's not easy, but I'm glad to see that every industry who I talk to, is it Biosystems we have here or many others, that they are determined to get better production and quicker. But the question is that still they need contracts. Without contracts, you will not get the production.
Mr. Start, I see you nodding and smiling. And what is your letter grade that you give NATO?
So it's a very subjective question. I'm going to give us a B. Why am I going to give us
generous.
Why am I going to give us a generous B? So I became National Armaments Director about a month after the beginning of the Ukraine war. And I walked into a NATO that was a body that was relatively sleepy, shall we say, and a body that hadn't been used to doing things at pace. And I've looked at the change of pace in those 2 years, and it is quite dramatic. Today, if you think about what the NATO nations have done for Ukraine, we've gicked millions of items of equipment from our current stocks. We've placed billions of dollars of contracts individually as nations. And together, we are more interoperable, interchangeable, and more trained and capable than at any time in the last 20 years. That is quite a remarkable change, and not something that my colleagues who had sat within NATO historically were expecting. NATO has got into gear. And people are to be genuinely thanked and rewarded for that effort. If I just picked my own organization, we started getting contracts out within 48 hours of the conflict. And not only we've delivered billions of pounds worth of acquisition, new acquisition of new systems, innovative new capabilities, as well as the traditional ones. We looked at the total number of items of equipment we'd provided. We'd provided 40 million individual items, everything from a single bullet all the way up to a Challenger tank and a whole bunch of Storm Shadow missiles and things in between. So that gets my score up from where you might expect it. That doesn't mean we've not got a huge job of work to do, and absolutely we have. The threat is not declining, it's accelerating. Our need to be more interoperable is really clear, and we discussed that a great deal in the panel earlier on. We've got to become more integrated. We've got to deliver on that promise of everything, everywhere, all at once, and that means we need to establish a much more open system with industry. And to your point of earlier on, we've got to make sure that not only that the contracts flow, we've got to make sure they're always on. So what have we been doing? For example, in the UK, we've created a national, we've worked with industry collaboratively to create a national munitions strategy. And that munitions strategy is all about making sure that our factories continue to burn consistently over the next decade. And if we need them to, they can ramp up if a conflict actually happens. And we're supporting that with the NATO multinational procurement initiatives, where we're inviting people, where we're going out and buying, for example, the lightweight modular missile from Thales. We're inviting others to get on board our acquisition so we can buy more. We're doing the same with MBDA, with things like the common modular missile and so on. So by using multinational procurement initiatives, we have an opportunity to scale up, and we're encouraging other allies to do the same thing. So I give it a B, but we're not at an A, and I'd like to be at an A with the scale of threat we have, so there's work to do.
Well, Ms. Kundrlova, will a B defeat Vladimir Putin?
I would give us an A for creativity. Even an A++, because what we have been missing in terms of quickly ramping up, missing in numbers that Ukraine needed to be delivered, and I'm speaking mainly about the large caliber ammunition. We've really tried hard to find the ways how to fill the gap. And I think if I mention the Czech ammunition initiative, where we really try to find the money and find the right ammunition to be delivered as quickly as possible to Ukraine. And it was already delivered to Ukraine, the first batches. So I think we've been really creative, and I have to thank to all of the countries that have contributed to this effort. In terms of ramping up production capacities, I would rather echo Hanno, maybe, but I think there's a lot of things going on already. If I just take our own industry in the Czech Republic, which is not ranked among the big names just mentioned by Andy, but we have our ammunition producers, and they have set up a new line for 155 ammunition caliber. They have doubled their production. There's another group that's producing in other countries. They have put 3 shifts, daily shifts, in order to produce more ammunition. So the effort has been tremendous. But I think there's a lot more to be done, and what the biggest obstacle, I think, and it's also in terms of the cooperation between different industries, it's, and it was already mentioned by Andy, it's the interoperability, even the interchangeability that we need to work on, and of course certification and testing, because if you as it is in the case of the Czech defense industry, that has to go from the old Soviet era systems to the new Western systems. You have to go through the testing, certification. It takes enormous time. So
My colleague, Paul McCleary at Politico, described Ukraine as a petting zoo of various kinds of artillery, munitions, equipment, the whole thing, and sometimes that doesn't work so well, right? So I wanted to ask you, Major General, what your letter grade is, and what is the biggest opportunity for improvement? Where do you think the alliance should focus when it comes to industrial production?
So let me start with a reflection. First of all, the war in Ukraine have for sure highlighted the effects of decades of disinvestment in the defense industrial sector. And the second reflection, second point, is quite obvious. We are witnessing a clash between an aggressor capable to rapidly shift to a war economy. And on the other side, we have a country that rely its defense capabilities on the international support. And unfortunately, this international support is fragmented, is full of national constraint and restraint of all kinds. So I know that it's in some way cynical, but this war gave us the opportunity to profound review and reflect on our defense organization, starting from the operational side, I mean the organization of our armed forces, and within NATO, the interoperability of our forces. And on the other side, most important, we have understood that the defense industrial sector is part of our deterrence and defense in NATO. So that's why we have to profoundly revise and reorganize our defense and security market system. Personally, I can think that we have to move rapidly, possibly on two different tracks. On one side, the governments should assure dedicated financing lines to the defense industry, should use largely the joint procurement, and at the same time, they have to stop the protectionist measures. This is a value, but it belongs to another era.
Well, I do want to get into protectionism, but I want to first address one point you just raised, which is financing. Perhaps, Minister, in Estonia, you're already spending, 4% of your GDP. Do you think the 2% is an outmoded target for NATO? Should countries be spending more?
The short answer is yes, because this is exactly what I will tell also here in different meetings, and we'll repeat that all the time, that 2% is not enough. Because, as I said, Russia is putting 7 to 9 on different calculations. But what is important to understand is that, of course, the long-term and sustainable financing of the industry is important. Interoperability is important. Joint procurements are important. But the downturn or the problem with the joint procurement is that are we ready to say that, let's say, in NATO, we have only one type of self-propelled howitzer. So this kills the competition. Are we ready to say that we have only one type of tank? This kills the competition. So, and I believe that, looking at Ukraine today, yes, they are world champions of interoperability because they have all the variety of NATO equipment and also Russian type of equipment. But somehow Russians have only one AK-47. So, this is the challenge for us, because even when we talk about, let's say, CV90 is one of the best infantry fighting vehicles at the moment on the market. Then when you take CV90, every country who has CV90 has different communication on it, has different modifications, and you can still not have this interoperability. Even when you take 155 artillery, so 155 artillery is one standard, but you cannot use in all type of howitzers the same shells. So the standard is there, but you cannot use it. So many obstacles have to be solved on the practical level in NATO. But the financing, coming back to your question, yes, the financing has to be increased, and our estimation is that it should be 2.5 to 3% for a long term.
I wanted to ask you, Major General, on the financing point. You're a European Union country. There's this tension between the desire to spend more on defense, but then the sort of strict spending and debt limits that the EU imposes, the Stability and Growth Pact. I think Italy has a proposal for perhaps how countries might find some flexibility there. Do you want to address that?
Yeah, and I really thank you for this question. Of course, one of the main problems in reorganizing our defense and security market system is the problem of financing. I must confess that the situation, and I'm referring to the European Union environment, is quite confused. A lot of bureaucratic issues created over the years. So I think we have to use also a monetary approach and solving some inconsistencies that we have in the financial compact in the European Union. That's why the Italian Minister of Defense, Mr. Crosetto, launched some months ago a proposal to exclude the defense expenditure from the constraint of the Growth and Stability Pact within the European Union. It's something that the European Union has already experienced to purchase the vaccine for COVID. So why not to apply the same system to the defense expenditure? For sure, this solution could free more resources for the defense expenditure, for the defense industries.
I think, Mr. Start, you wanted to weigh in?
Yeah, a couple of dynamics. Firstly, the UK government, former and the new UK government, were aligned in viewing 2.5% GDP as the target that NATO needs to aspire to as soon as possible. So the UK has a position that says more money is necessary, but on top of that, they would like to see us getting greater value from the money that we spend. In order to do that, there are things that we need to do at a NATO level and the things that we need to do at a national level. At a NATO level, we want competition because competition inspires innovation, but we don't want to have so many different variety of systems that we are spreading our non-recurring engineering across 32 different types for every different kind of aircraft or ship or similar that we need. By doing so, we are seriously diluting our capability. So in NATO, we have to find a way to better collaborate across industry. That's true within Europe, it's true transatlantically. That is incredibly difficult, but it's something that we, as the NATO governments, have to work together to improve. And we've got to make that equipment more interoperable so that we can get greater effects from it. At a national level, we've got to drive up productivity. We need to be more innovative. We need to make sure our industries are absolutely engaging the opportunity that is coming out of AI and modern manufacturing techniques. Because if we don't, our adversaries who are using those techniques will simply outproduce us in terms of bang for buck. So there's a job of work for government, but there's also a job of work for industry to not be complacent and aggressively improve their productivity.
I think, Minister, you wanted to talk about some lessons for industry from Ukraine.
Yes, I made some remarks because, we also have to look into the future, what we will do and where the industry will go. The one thing is that, of course, as there will be more money, also industry is going to fight for that money. Will fight for that money. But for me, what I see and where we have the obstacles or the challenges, that maybe we should not concentrate so much on the specific products. Because when we look at the Ukraine at the moment, then we see how inventive they are or how innovative they are, and they are putting, you know, the man pads to the just an ordinary Hilux, Toyota Hilux, and then they can use it. So inventing their own new products, and I believe that one of the messages from my side to the industry is definitely that I believe that the governments all around Europe and the world and NATO will concentrate more on the target destruction effects rather to specific products. That we will say that as we changed in Estonia already the days of supply approach to the target destruction approach. So that means that we are not counting how many rounds we can fire with one artillery, but we are rather looking at how many targets we have to destroy on the other side of our border, which means that this brings us to the totally new approach, that we will not need so much 155 rounds, rather to get something which will have an effect in 300 kilometers. And this is at the moment maybe not even ATACMS, but it might be something which is a drone or a small rocket or a different type of missile. So, and this is, I believe, what will be the future also for the industry, that the governments will not go to the procurements which say that we want to buy ATACMS, but we will go to the procurement, say that we want to destroy a target in 300 kilometers. And this is for the industry then to provide the solutions, that, you know, then we will fight for the solutions, that somebody will come and say that, okay, I have a drone, I have 100 drones, or I have a small missile. So this will be probably the future also for the procurements.
Ms. Kondylorova, do you see lessons for industry from the last 2 years in Ukraine?
Maybe let me first comment a bit on the financing, if I may, from a bit different perspective than the GDP, but about the financing, the ramping up the production and the industrial capacities as such. Maybe it's not a problem of such a big problem for big corporations, but I believe it also is. But for small and medium industry, it's extremely difficult in the environment in which for many years defense industry has been seen as something very negative. It's very difficult to finance the new production capacities with private banks, as they have to abide by the rules. They have to be responsible to their stakeholders, and defense industry may be seen as something that is not good to put the money in. So this is another issue that needs to be really taken care of. There's many things already that have been happening. Just recently, there was a signature of an agreement between NATO Innovation Fund and European Investment Fund, based on the change of the policy of the European Investment Bank, that made it easier for the dual technologies to be financed. So this is something as well that we need to be aware of, that financing is also about the ability for the industry to access the financial resources on the private markets, and there needs to be much more done at the institutional level as well, I think.
That's an important point.
Just to, that's a huge problem in Europe. Probably from the US side, you don't have the complete visibility of the problem. In Europe, we are witnessing the problem of the so-called ethical banks that are growing. And so this is another point of difficulties for our industrial system in Europe to access financing. That's why the European Commission is considering to remove some constraints for the European Investment Bank that today is not allowed to finance entirely military projects and products. And that's why the European Commission, once again, is thinking about the issue of Eurobond dedicated to the industrial defense.
Oh, that's fascinating. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't also touch on one of the biggest issues here in the Washington conversation, which is industrial policy and the manufacturing base, protecting heartland jobs. Here in the US, lawmakers of both parties have worked to add Buy American provisions to the National Defense Authorization Act. And they argue that this isn't just about domestic jobs, but also weaknesses in relying on foreign supply chains, about cybersecurity threats. Meanwhile, in Europe, historically, the majority of equipment has been purchased from outside of Europe, but the European Union's new industrial strategy is asking countries to spend half of their defense budgets on European suppliers by the year 2030, and then moving up to 60% by 2035. So I wanted to get you all to weigh in on whether you think these Buy American and Buy European efforts are a good idea because they will strengthen the industrial base for the long term, or are they a bad idea because they're going to stand in the way of the kind of transatlantic and allied co-production that is needed, and perhaps by cutting out other countries from supply chains, we may be prolonging the time it takes to actually acquire this. Would you like to start, Mr. Stark?
The new UK government recognises it needs to reevaluate its defence industrial strategy, and is wrestling with exactly those kind of dynamics of how do you get the balance right. They do recognise it's complex and it's a balance. My personal view, which is not yet the government policy, because I don't yet know what the policy is, we haven't defined it. My personal view is, firstly, we need to find a way to make sure that we collaborate on defence industrial investment, because if we don't, we lose. The economics simply mean we lose. So collaboration is necessary. That doesn't mean you can't have jobs in each of the countries. It simply means you need to plan better, and you need to figure out how to distribute the workload better. I applaud companies who've created multi-domestic footprints, because those companies who are multi-domestic can take a contract and share the work across multiple countries. I also applaud the work of organisations like OCCAR that seeks to get a balance of work share, but doesn't do it on every programme. They do it across the selection of programmes. So some programmes might be very European, some programmes might be very American, but on balance, the work is shared between the countries who are contributing based on their skills and talents. And I think that kind of model is the sort of answer we've got to get to.
Anyone else like to weigh in?
Yeah, well, very short comments. First, of course, I do not want to see a lot of protectionism. What unfortunately we still see, because I've had the approach all the time, and I've said to my NAD that we have three goals. First, to get the best quality product we can find. Secondly, for the best price we can find. Thirdly, for the quick delivery. So these are the main three principles. But on the other hand, I fully understand that there is a need to protect your own industry also. But when we are all protecting our own industries, then how we can get out of that circle of mistrust? So this is why I rather prefer that we will have companies coming to the tenders, so that they will say that, okay, I want to have also something produced in your country. Because this is, at the end of the day, what was also said, that it's beneficial for all of us. And localizations, offsets, these might just increase the price. But on the other hand, although Estonian industry has gone up a lot, we don't have the heavy industry. So, but maybe when we will come to the market and when we will put additional 1.5, 1.6 billions to the ammunition, and we will procure in next 3-4 years ammunition in worth of 3 billions, then there are companies who would like to also invest to Estonia, because at the end of the day, it's our taxpayers' money, and when we send it all out, then taxpayers will also ask that, okay, what do we get from this? So there are many questions to answer.
I'm afraid we're going to have to end it there, unfortunately. But I know we could talk all day, and I know this conference will continue to talk about these important issues. I think our takeaways here are the importance of financing of reliable contracts, increased spending, collaboration, coordination, and interoperability. All of these are important. I know the people in this room are going to be working on these topics for the rest of the day. So I'd like to thank our panelists so much for their perspectives, and thank you for the important work that you're doing.